Hey everyone, Anthony here in our Oakville store today to bring you a first look at the brand new Canon R5 Mark II. This camera has a very similar look to the R5, a new battery, a new processor, and a new fan, but a whole lot more to dive into, so let's dive in. So let's just take a second and just look at the new R5 Mark II. It looks very similar, ever so slightly thicker than the R5, and that's because of this vent on the underside of the camera. We'll talk more about this in a little bit, but let's pop out the battery on this newer model, and you'll be happy to hear that your current Canon batteries will work on this new camera, but this one is a little bit more beefed up. So this is the LPE6P, giving you about 630 shots in photo and a little extra juice for video shooters as well. Your older LPE6N, this will fit no problem in the new model, but the performance of the LPE6P is just a little bit more beefed up for this new camera. So when it comes to photography, when we're talking about this new R5 Mark II, we are talking a 45 megapixel sensor with 8.5 stops of IBIS. The camera has a backside illuminated sensor, so what that equates to is just better low light performance, especially when paired with that new and improved IBIS. When it comes to the sensor, light is just able to reach those pixels easier on a backside illuminated sensor, and that's why camera companies make a big deal mentioning this when their sensor goes backside illuminated. In the R5 Mark II, that's exactly what we have, and that's a welcomed improvement. But Canon has also put a digic accelerator inside the camera as well, allowing the camera's performance to process videos and photos much faster. So we can expect improved readout speeds for photography, but also improved rolling shutter when it comes to video, and I know that's what you guys were talking about when it comes to the video. The camera takes CF Express Type B and fast SD cards as well. We get 12 frames per second, that's your burst speed when in mechanical shutter mode, and we can bump that up to about 30 frames per second when in electronic mode. Usually in an electronic shutter mode, you might get some distortion happening, especially when shooting sports, but thanks to that new digic processor, those distortions will be reduced. The eye-controlled autofocus is something that has made its way into the R5 Mark II as well, and this is wild technology that I'm sure a lot of people have not played with yet, and it's something actually worth coming into the store and checking out, because in the camera, you can make adjustments between your left eye and your right eye, and there's a floating purple circle in the EVF or on the screen, and it'll mimic where your pupil is looking, and the autofocus will move alongside that. So you can make adjustments to your eye in camera, and over time it's just going to become more accurate. This is a wild feature that I think is the future of autofocus. This camera removed any blackout when it comes to continuous shooting mode, and we get a bump in that maximum shutter speed available on the R5 Mark II. I was able to push this up to 32,000th of a second. So that's all for photo specs. Let's move on to video. So let's just talk about the main complaints of the original R5. That would be the lack of fan, or just lacking the ability to keep the camera cool when it comes to video. Rolling shutter was also another concern for the content creators, and it appears that these two things, or these two problems, have been solved with some caveats. So when thinking about video and the R5 Mark II, the first question that I had was, how has Canon made changes to keep this camera cool? So Canon is calling this a passive cooling design with two vents, and I'm not too sure what that actually means, but two fans, it's gotta be good. There is a vent on the bottom of this camera that doesn't make the camera noticeably bigger than the R5, and Canon is saying that the cooling fan attachment will fit on the bottom of the camera and then suck heat out of the camera for better performance. But more tests are definitely needed to ensure that we can record longer takes without throwing this camera into like the freezer or something like that. There are some time restrictions on the camera depending on the mode that you go into, and we'll go over the video codecs right now. So 8K 60p is limited to 18 minutes when just using the body only, and that's fine because like who the heck records 8K 60p for 18 minutes straight? And think about how much data that would actually be. But 8K 30p limited to 37 minutes unless you attach that cooling fan grip, then you get just over 120 minutes, assuming the temperature in the room is about 23 degrees, and only if you turn auto power off temperature setting to high. So there are some workarounds here, and depending on what and how you shoot, the fan might be a crucial accessory. I'm thinking for like the normal YouTube type of content, I'd be happy with like 4K oversampled and then capturing the odd slow motion clip. You'll have no problem doing that on this camera because you get about 120 minutes of 4K, 24 frames per second, and 22 minutes of 120p. That's totally fine for the average content creator for say like YouTube and such. The Digic X processor will also reduce some of that rolling shutter, but more tests are definitely needed to see some actual improvements there. But this is something to kind of ease the mind of people who are just not a fan of that like jello effect on the original R5. So when it comes to video specs, the first thing that I look into is going to be dynamic range, and Canon is claiming that this gets about 16 stops of dynamic range, which is on par with some entry-level cinema cameras, and this should allow the R5 Mark II to also become Netflix approved. We're going to have to see how this kind of performs later on because I haven't got a chance to actually test the video footage myself. Everything's in kind of pre-production mode, but I've been told that 16 stops of dynamic range is what you're getting on the R5 Mark II, but usable dynamic range can sometimes differ, so more tests are needed. People are obsessed about C-Log3, that color picture profile that everybody really loves, and people will be pumped to hear that C-Log2 and C-Log3 is available in the R5 Mark II. So 8K 60p RAW is our highest powered video codec that we get in this camera, and of course that is available in the full frame kind of mode. 4K 60p SRAW is DCI and it can be recorded up to 60 frames per second, but the camera can do 120 frames per second in that full frame mode. There are some 4K cropped modes, but there's nothing in the full frame modes that forces you into the cropped mode. The cropped modes are just there if you want it, which is great. The full frame 4K modes are oversampled, so it's a huge benefit to staying in the 4K full frame mode, and you do get 240 frames per second when in HD, and that is not cropped. So that's a nice change to see. Now, lastly, some people are going to ask, what's the difference between the R5 Mark II and the R5C? There are some autofocus enhancements thanks to that Digic processor. Both can now shoot 8K 60p and both can do a compressed RAW format. The R5C has a fan built in, and the R5 Mark II requires that fan to be attached in some situations depending on the runtime that you want the camera to have, but also maybe just the climate that you're shooting in. And I think that's probably just a safe bet just to get that fan attachment so that way you're good to go. The R5 Mark II has the traditional Canon menu system. You're missing the cinema camera menu on the R5 Mark II, which you do get in the R5C because that is a more video focused Canon camera. But just quickly whipping through the menu on the R5 Mark II, it looks a little bit cleaner. So there are some improvements made here, but the R5 Mark II is a photo first camera and it leans heavier in that direction, so you're not going to get that menu, although you do get that photo video switch. So that's all for me. That's a first look into the R5 Mark II, and if you want more information, hit henrys.com. My name's Anthony, and I'll see you in the next one.